Hey guys, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. We are loaded today. A lot on Saturday in Columbia against South Carolina, as you might expect. Later on in the show, we'll have the guy that'll call the game for CBS on Saturday, Brad Nessler. He'll give us his thoughts on Georgia and South Carolina. Also, former Georgia quarterback David Green going to be on hand as well. He'll weigh in on Jake Fromm and Justin Fields' performance from Week 1 and kind of relive some of his great moments in Williams-Brice Stadium and 2 Georgia wins from the past. Before that, though, we'll kind of deal with maybe a little bit of a troubling stat, at least in the minds of Georgia fans, in terms of what could happen this weekend. We are fully loaded. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
What a great time we had last night at the Marlows in Dunwoody for our big game preview, looking ahead to Georgia and South Carolina, and it was so much fun. I mean, we had so many Georgia fans on hand there last night, and talking to people over and over again, you really just got the same sense from virtually everyone you spoke to that, last week, nice dress rehearsal, maybe an appetizer before the main course. But for most Georgia fans, it almost seems like the season really starts on Saturday. And I'm glad to know that I'm not the outlier here, that everybody else feels very much the same way that I do, that, I'm on pins and needles. I was telling some people last night, I may not sleep good on Friday. I've been sort of bouncing around, a lot of nervous energy all week long. I am just ready for South Carolina. I'm ready to see Georgia there. I'm ready to find out some answers to the questions that I still have about the Dogs. I'm just ready to sort of see, some big-time SEC football, and on Saturday, we're going to get a chance to see it. And I have been confident about Georgia all week long. Most of you kind of have as well. There has been, some, well, what about this, and wait and see about that. There's been some of that, but for the most part, I've been pretty confident about what's going to happen here on Saturday. I do want to at least deal with the one issue that I still think could be a problem for Georgia. The one issue that, while I don't think this is going to be something that trips up the Dogs, it is something I at least have on my mind a bit as you get ready to go to a Williams-Brice Stadium, a stadium I have great respect for, a crowd that I have great respect for in terms of its ability to sort of impact the environment. And, we've seen examples of that from Georgia in the past when he has gone to Columbia to play South Carolina there at Williams-Brice Stadium. So much so that William Gunter, who is a sports radio host in Columbia, I guess he was watching ESPN, and he'd seen ESPN put out a pretty interesting stat. Let me show you this on Twitter. I saw it because Mike Griffith, our buddy from DawgNation, retweeted this. But what William Gunter puts out is that per ESPN College Football Live, South Carolina and Georgia have met 5 times at Williams-Brice Stadium with both teams ranked. South Carolina is 5-0 in those games. I'm assuming he means straight up. That seems like a crazy stat. And it does seem like a crazy stat on the one hand. Obviously, South Carolina has not beaten Georgia very much in its history overall. Georgia dominates the head-to-head rivalry between these two programs, and I use rivalry somewhat loosely. But according to that stat, when South Carolina has been good enough to beat Georgia playing in its own stadium, it has found a way to do that. Now, listen, I don't mean to go down a negative road here, but honesty does compel me to admit that a lot of us, and I'm 41, a lot of us who've been here for a while, we sort of remember that there are a lot of decades here when Georgia kind of disappointed sometimes, right? I mean, I think about the 1988 game, for instance, when Sterling Sharp was still at South Carolina. I guess Todd Ellis may have still been the quarterback, and Georgia goes into that stadium and loses. There were a lot of that kind of stuff, sort of in that era at that time. So maybe the stat, when you look back on some of Georgia's, disappointing history of the last couple of decades, maybe that's not all that surprising. But the other thing I think the stat really speaks to, though, is, and this is the one thing that I will admit I do have on my mind a bit. I'm expecting a Georgia win. I'm expecting to be somewhat convincing on Saturday, but I am a little curious with the South Carolina crowd. After all, when you see that stat, ranked South Carolina, which it is, it's, I think, I guess 24th in both polls here this week, ranked South Carolina playing behind a raucous crowd, that becomes suddenly pretty tough for Georgia teams to beat, or maybe even tough for any team to beat. That's at least something to think about. And last night, for our Marlowe's big game preview there in Dunwoody, we had a chance to talk to Brandon Cablano about this. Brandon was a 3-year starter at Georgia along the offensive line, one of the real leaders of Kirby Smart's first team there in 2016. And I asked him, as a guy that's played in this game and played in this stadium, is the South Carolina crowd really all what it's hyped up to be? And Brandon gave a pretty interesting answer. Take a listen.
It's very different than what you're normally used to, especially up there. It's probably one of the loudest stadiums that we play in. It's very different. You try to simulate it in practice. You pipe in the crowd noise, but, it's just not the same until you're actually there.
I think this is relevant for Georgia right now because obviously there's a lot of young players kind of going and doing some of this for the first time. When he says it's very different than what you're used to, he's comparing that to Sanford Stadium, where it's a very friendly crowd, and you sort of know your way around the place. When you get to a spot like Williams-Brice Stadium, all of a sudden, there's almost nothing, at least according to Brandon there, almost nothing you can do from the preparation standpoint that truly gets you ready for experiencing that for the first time. And for Brandon, a lot of this is actually about the student section, that the way it's positioned there at Williams-Brice Stadium really has them breathing right down your neck. Here's more from him on that.
They got Sandstorm rocking. Students are going crazy.
Yeah.
And you can be in warm-ups, and the student section's about 5 feet from you. You can hear every word they're saying. The students will line up there and just talk crap to you all pregame. Yeah. And, it's just something that you got to keep focused on in the game. I think it's something they'll be prepared for. But for younger cats, it'll definitely be a little bit of a shockwave.
So here is why I think the crowd's worth considering here for this Saturday, and why I at least want to pay a little bit of attention to it, because he talks about young cats, and in that case, Brandon Cablano probably means some of these freshmen who are going to be playing and sort of in a big role. But you've also got a lot of sophomores on this team as well, and what they experienced in 2017, they just didn't really get a lot of this, right? I mean, you had the road trip to Tennessee, and I wasn't in Knoxville for that game, but what I heard was it was really loud at the beginning, but by halfway through the first half, certainly into the second half, the Tennessee fans had all sort of gone home at that point in time. There wasn't a whole lot of an atmosphere created on the road at Tennessee because of the fact that, frankly, Georgia was blowing them out. It's probably fair to admit that when it comes to the Auburn game last November, that crowd was intense, and I think Kirby Smart himself even kind of admitted that Georgia sort of struggled with it within that environment there. So do you think about that a bit as you head towards Saturday in South Carolina in another stadium that's going to feel similar? I mean, the other big road game that Georgia played a year ago was at Notre Dame, and Kirby Smart was pretty clear this week that, listen, that's not an actual road game because of the fact that about half the stadium was filled with Georgia fans. It's probably more like a neutral site game or even a Georgia home game almost, because Notre Dame fans were so willing to relinquish their tickets. And as Brandon Cablano explained last night from the Marlows and Dunwoody, what Notre Dame fans did a year ago, you can't expect South Carolina fans to do here this year. Here's more from Brandon.
Notre Dame was a special game. I think it's something that a lot of Georgia fans have been planning for the past 3 years. Yeah. It's something that people had gone way out of their way, and no matter what kind of season we were having, they were going to be at that game. South Carolina is a lot different. There's going to be the max amount of Georgia fans that there will be, and that'll be it.
So listen, I mean, the bottom line for me this entire discussion is that when you think about this crowd against South Carolina, there's really only one way to deal with that. And I mentioned the Tennessee game a moment ago. Look at the interception to start that game. From the very get-go, the air is sort of taken out of the balloon from the Tennessee crowd a year ago. I think Georgia got the same kind of chance to do something like that here this Saturday. There is no doubt when that Ric Flair music, that 2001 Space Odyssey's playing before South Carolina runs on the field, it's going to be rocking and rolling. That stadium literally can shake. When that Sandstorm, and many of you know that sort of like techno EDM type music they've played there for years and years, when they get that thing going, the towels start waving. It's a cool looking vibe. I'm not gonna deny that. It can be really intense. But then what happens once the game kicks off? What happens when the two teams start playing? What happens when Georgia gets on the board first? What happens when Georgia gets into the backfield and sacks Jake Bentley first? As Brandon Cablano says, it's really those early moments when you assert yourself that you actually convince the crowd to maybe sit down and stop making so much noise.
That's definitely one way you get the crowd to be quiet, is you go in there and you start beating up on them. If that happens, I think that happened when we were up there. As soon as you start beating down, the students will trickle out of the stadium. They'll hit the bars, and you'll get on with the road game.
Yeah, so maybe Brandon Cablano's right. Maybe Georgia's going to be pretty good for the Columbia, South Carolina Tourism Board on a Saturday. Maybe the Chamber of Commerce is going to be happy. Maybe those bars and restaurants and nightclubs and things like that will all be filled up pretty early on Saturday evening because Georgia quiets that crowd at Williams-Brice Stadium. And really, that's one of the great things about sports, and it's one of the great ways to sort of assert yourself and show your true power, is when you can take a crowd that wants to do nothing more than make life miserable for you, and Georgia players turn around and make it miserable for them by giving them nothing to cheer about, no reason to stand up. That could be a fun way to watch Georgia do that on Saturday, take the air out of the balloon, as it really makes a big statement, getting a very convincing win on the road. I believe it's going to happen, and I cannot wait to watch it unfold. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Thanks for being with us. Whether it's live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter feed, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep, in podcast form, Apple Podcasts, the Google Podcast Player. I always say posting the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. I do have to admit, a little bit of an unforced error yesterday. I guess the show did not get published at the world-famous DawgNation.com. That is completely on me. That is my error. If you were looking for that at DawgNation.com yesterday and missed that, I'll make sure both shows are up for you today. So my sincere apologies for, I guess, just not quite yet in mid-season form yet. So we'll make sure we get both the shows from Tuesday and Wednesday here today. Actually, yesterday was Wednesday. Today's Thursday. Nonetheless, we'll get all the shows up for you there at the world-famous DawgNation.com for those of you who prefer to hear the podcast that way. By the way, let me say also a very thank you to you for being with us last night at the Marlowe's Tavern in Dunwoody for our DawgNation season kickoff. Really good stuff there. It was actually our DawgNation big game preview looking ahead to South Carolina. A lot of fun. You heard a little bit from Brandon Cablano earlier. He was great with the crowd beforehand. Really appreciate that. Also, big thanks to Marco's Pizza for making DawgNation Daily available each and every day. Of course, Marco's got a great deal right now. You can get 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. It's every store, every day, the Italian way. I know yesterday was National Cheese Pizza Day. I know many of you celebrated that in style at Marco's Pizza. And today, it's that everyday offer of 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas for $6.99 each. And we love Marco's Pizza in my family. I'm glad to hear so many of you love it as well, and really appreciate them being a part of DawgNation Daily each and every day. As I mentioned to our video audience earlier, we're very busy on today's show. Later on, we'll hear from Brad Nessler, who is going to be good enough to join us. He is the broadcaster for CBS on Saturday between Georgia and South Carolina. He's got the play-by-play calls alongside Gary Danielson there in the booth. Brad will give us his thoughts on both Georgia and South Carolina. Also, in a couple of minutes, we'll hear from former Georgia quarterback David Green, who's always great enough to join us from time to time here on DawgNation Daily. Really fun stuff with him coming up. Before that, though, let me go around the doghouse here for a moment. And, the news that was sort of all over social media yesterday, and I guess it's 24/7 Sports that has this first, that Jonathan Ledbetter, Georgia's defensive end, reportedly injured during Tuesday's practice, the sprained ankle. He was seen by a lot of reporters yesterday with the, I guess it's called a walking boot, we're going to call that, kind of, somewhat limited there in practice. I don't get the impression from, some of the people that have been talking about this. I was not in Athens yesterday. I was at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody, but I don't get the impression from the people who have kind of talked about this that this is necessarily all that serious. So maybe a bullet dodged here for the Georgia defense just a bit, but nonetheless, it is the kind of thing that you do, I think, still pay close attention to here. And I guess what this really brings up for me when you think about the Ledbetter injury that 24/7 Sports reported about, I think what it actually ends up going to is my confidence in Georgia, and how much of that confidence is based on this team right now being at full health, right? I mean, listen, James Cook missing the first half against South Carolina, I think that matters a bit. Jonathan Ledbetter missing, some time at practice. If he were to miss some time in the game, I don't quite yet know that Georgia has enough seasoned depth to be ready to go there in that regard. That's the kind of thing that does matter to me just a bit. So it's the kind of thing I think that you'll pay close attention to. It looks like in this case you may be okay here when it comes to Ledbetter, but overall, this is a team leader and a really effective quality player that you do not want to miss right now if you're the Georgia Bulldogs. So hopefully Ledbetter will be full go for Saturday, because I think he's that perfect figure to have kind of right there as that classic defensive end. I know he's cross-trained some as an outside linebacker. It seems like that experiment's over. They could probably sort of shift him in the inside as well when they want that pass rush coming from the middle. But he's a great 3-4 defensive end. Georgia needs him. Hopefully they will have him on Saturday, but it is worth pointing that a lot of reporters didn't notice him somewhat hobbled during Wednesday's practice and dealing with a little bit of an issue there with the ankle on that. Sounds like we have David Green ready to go. So we'll jump out of the first segment here early just a little bit, and we'll talk to David Green and have Brad Nessler later on, and a whole lot more coming up with you. It is great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And I will say hello to David Green here. He's the former Georgia quarterback, and listen, a great friend of us here on DawgNation Daily. And one of the things that's always great when David comes on the show, he'll tell us about some of the big happenings going on, autograph signings before Georgia home games there, Tailgate Apparel. Of course, you can find Tailgate Apparel, 279 East Broad Street in Athens, a great spot to get all your game day goods. Now, I know last week a lot of you were probably going in there to get those T-shirts because it was so hot and just intense heat there in Athens last week. So, David, I imagine the T-shirts were probably flying off the shelves there at Tailgate Apparel. Anybody who may have been wearing long sleeves or maybe even the collared shirt, that may have been a little too much for this past Saturday. Those Tailgate Apparel T-shirts are probably coming in handy, right?
There's no doubt about it. I tell you what, I didn't go to the game Saturday. It was I kind of wish I was there. We had some other plans. We were up at the lake this past weekend, but man, it was hot. I've talked to a lot of folks that were there, and they said it was brutally hot. I mean, it kind of reminded me back of the O2 game when we played Alabama, and Alabama's the hottest game I ever played in. But it certainly seemed like the heat was out in full force, and the sun was covering every bit of the stadium Saturday.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I want to talk to you about what we're expecting from that in terms of the South Carolina game in a couple of moments. But before that, let me deal with a couple of other issues. You know, I have very vivid memories of a couple of your trips to South Carolina in 2002 and then again in 2004. They were both Georgia wins, but they were both kind of thrilling games. And the one thing I remember about having been in the stadium for both those days is, boy, that South Carolina crowd really kind of gets after it. We were talking about this a lot before you joined us here today. That crowd really can make a lot of noise, and you played in a lot of environments like that over the course of your time in the SEC. As a quarterback, thinking about Jake Fromm kind of being in that role here this week, what are the preparations like? You know, how much does it change what you're trying to do when there is just so much intensity in the atmosphere around you?
Well, the biggest difference, it seems like, because, we always played South Carolina early as well, is, you play that first game and, things just kind of happen so easy, just like watching Georgia Saturday. You pretty much did whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And then you go and you play South Carolina in the second game, and then you realize that it's not easy to get a yard. The things that were wide open the week before are not wide open anymore. The opponent's a lot better. And look, one thing about South Carolina, they're always going to have a good defense. It seems like they always have. Offensively is where they've kind of sputtered for so many years, but it seems like they're back scoring a lot of points again. So it's a tough environment to play in. The one thing South Carolina has, they have very loyal fans, and even if they've had subpar seasons, man, those folks still come out, support the team, and bring a lot of excitement and a whole deal. The first away game I ever, participated in was at South Carolina in 2000. I was a redshirt that year, and South Carolina went 0 for 10, I believe, the year before, and they beat us at home and rushed the field out there. And I remember that's my first away experience ever as a Georgia Bulldog. So, look, they always played us tough. We always struggled offensively, putting points on the board, and not even just the teams I was on. You look at the last 15 years, we hadn't really lit it up offensively. But this is a different team, a different culture, a different coaching staff, and I'm pretty confident. I think offensively we should do well.
So if you don't mind, I want to go back to the past a little bit more here, because you mentioned, being a redshirt in that 2000 team that lost, but your first playing experience at Williams-Brice came in 2002, and one of the great thrilling games of that SEC championship season, your buddy David Pollock takes the football. I think it was Phil Petty was the quarterback that he took it from there in the end zone, and really the rest was history. You guys sort of used that as a springboard to win every game out, with the exception of the Florida game there in October, and win the SEC championship. How much do you look back on a game like that, and what were your memories of it? At the time, I don't think any of us knew how good the season had a chance to be the rest of the way, but really that's one of those, highlight plays that'll show up for 50 more years in terms of, Pollock stripping the ball, you guys getting the win there on the road. Do you have memories of that game? Is it something that you think about?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a couple things I remember. 2002 is one, we had the lightning delay, which was odd. That's not something typically happens. There's a bad storm rolling in. We had to sit in the locker room longer than normal. But when I think about just playing at South Carolina in general, the one word that just sticks in my mind is just tough. It was hard. It was hard to just get a yard. If it was 3rd and 1, it was hard to run a fullback up the middle and get it. It was hard in the passing game, and even when we had success, from 20 to 20, we had a hard time punching the ball in and scoring touchdowns. We finally, in 2004, my senior year, I threw a pick six early in that game, and it was looking grim. I think we were down 16-0, and then we hit a couple of touchdowns. I know I hit Reggie on I believe it was a post, and we finally started opening it up a little bit, having a little success, but I would say probably tough. It's just hard to get a yard in that stadium for whatever reason. Now, it was a different time, different team, this Georgia offense, after watching them Saturday and watching on TV, I'm sitting here going, holy cow, I'm not used to seeing that much speed. I almost thought, Brandon, I kind of had my DVR on fast forward, and I didn't. You know, you got like 1 through 4 in the fast forward. I thought I was on 1.
Sure.
It was just shocking to me how fast we are, especially on the perimeters. I just even like Tyler Simmons, when I saw him go around it, I didn't remember him being that fast last year. And it seems like our guys are just kind of playing at a whole nother level.
Yeah, David, I agree with you. I was impressed by Tyler Simmons' speed as well, because he's not one of the ones you think of as being, one of the faster guys. Although your buddy Terrence Edwards, who we've spoken to from time to time here around DawgNation, he's done some work with Tyler, and he was actually bragging on his speed during the offseason. So from that standpoint, maybe that's just from good conditioning work he's been doing, because I know that Terrence Edwards was really proud of some of the work that he had done with Tyler. You also kind of mentioned that 2004 game where you guys won after, kind of building a deficit from the beginning there. The other thing I remember about that game, and I know you'll join me in saying the same thing as well, how much fun is to sort of look back on that one now and see Paul Oliver's interception to sort of seal that deal. Obviously, we all know, Oliver's life was certainly taken too soon, and that's one of the great causes that Mark Richt really believed in supporting the Paul Oliver network. To think back to that 2004 game and the fact that the victory was sealed with the Paul Oliver interception, these years later, that makes that game even more special for me.
There's no doubt. Look, I was fortunate. My timing in Georgia, I was there with a great defense, and it seemed like time and time again when offensively we could just get up in the fourth quarter. I mean, our defense always stood. They always stepped up to the challenge, and it was a different guy every time. Sometimes it was. I mean, I think about back to those games. Sometimes it was Tim Wansley. Sometimes it was Pollock. Sometimes it was Tim Jennings, Paul Oliver. We had so many guys that weren't just trying to get out there and just blend in. There were guys that were wanting to make the play to win for the team. And when you got guys that aren't afraid of the spotlight, it makes things a lot of fun.
All right, before we hear about what's coming up at Tailgate Apparel before the Middle Tennessee State game next Saturday, let me talk to you about a couple of other issues here for a moment, if you don't mind. You mentioned heat. It was oppressive in Athens a week ago. The expectation is, my wife was telling me that she heard the heat index for Saturday in Columbia is going to be like 98. So you're talking about, if anything, maybe even hotter in Columbia, especially given the fact of where the stadium sits out there in that big old parking lot. Maybe even hotter there than it was in Athens this past week. As a player, how do you prepare yourself for that? I imagine there's some mental and physical stuff that kind of goes into that. As a player, what did you do when you knew you were about to be in really extreme conditions like that?
Well, I think, a couple of things. One, you need to make sure you eat well and you're hydrated and you get plenty of sleep during the week. I think that's always a key. I think on defense, you want to make sure you get off the field on third down. There's nothing that's going to wear a defense out more than, 12, 15 play drives. So when you get your chance to get off the field, you got to make it happen. Offensively, you got to, you can't go out there and go 3 and out, because there's nothing worse than as an offense, you go out there and go 3 and out, and you come up sidelines and defense is looking at you like, really? Like I just sat down. So you got to sustain some drives and not turn the ball over where you're putting guys in that kind of situation. I'll say this: look, Kirby, he's going to have his team conditioned. The one thing about it, they're going to be in the elements just as much as we are. It's just like you said, when we get in some of those situations on 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3, we got to be able to make the play, because we can just as easily wear them down as they can us. And it was kind of interesting to see the kind of tempo we had. It seemed like, against Austin Peay, I don't know if it was just, strategic for Austin Peay, but it seemed like we were running at a faster pace than what I remember us running last year. We were really trying to, it just seemed like we kind of had the gas pedal down last week, and I don't know if that's something we're going to continue to try to do, or we're going to try to slow it down. It'll be interesting to see.
So before we let you go here, David, let us know Tailgate Apparel coming up next Saturday. What a great autograph signing it was with Sean Jones a week ago. I know you guys will have big things planned for Tailgate Apparel coming up next Saturday there before the Middle Tennessee State game. It's become one of the great places to sort of congregate pregame, if nothing else than just to sort of get out of the heat and come be in the air conditioning there for a minute and see some really cool Georgia apparel. So I know a lot of folks will be looking forward to seeing you guys at a 279 East Broad Street next week in Athens as well.
Well, absolutely. It's going to be a 7:15 game, so it's going to a lot of fans, tailgating all day long. And you mentioned a guy earlier who's actually going to be there. It's going to be Terrence Edwards.
Really?
Terrence will be there. Yeah, Terrence will be there from 4 to 6 next week, signing autographs, taking pictures, and so you talk about a Georgia legend. I mean, a guy that was fun to throw to. Holy cow! I mean, that guy, he was always open. When people talk about who was one of your favorite receivers, I always say Terrence was one of them because he was always open. And there's something said for that when guy can go up, make plays, and make you look good.
Well, I will say this. He was a very good player, and I obviously have very fond memories of him in a Georgia uniform. But the other thing, David, about Terrence, and the reason why people would want to go see him at a Tailgate Apparel next Saturday, this is a guy that's really plugged into the sport right now. I mentioned, he's worked with Tyler Simmons. He's worked with Trey Blunt, two guys on the team right now. He's done a lot of work with sort of the next generation of Georgia wide receivers. As you know, he's like a personal coach that develops a lot of wide receivers. He's worked with Tavares King, who's in the NFL. I mean, he's a really good guy to even just talk football with because, he is really carved out a great niche for himself as a wide receivers coach, and he knows a lot of these players, and he can give you a lot of really interesting insight on and what's going on, with the program. So that's another cool thing about getting an autograph from him, getting a picture taken with him is he just knows a lot about the current team because he has such close relationships with a lot of these players.
He's plugged in. I mean, look, the Edwards family in general, between Robert and Terrence, they know football. Terrence played a long time in the Canadian Football League, had a phenomenal, professional career there, and he's coaching high school football now. He's a great guy. I think a lot of the current guys look up to him. And he's a humble guy. He's fun to be around. The fans will love to meet him. If they hadn't met Terrence, they ought to come by there this week. I guess in 2 weeks now, on the 15th, and get a chance to meet him because, you talk about a great dog and just a great person. And as you mentioned, he's got a great mind for the game. Well,
speaking of great dogs, but David, we think you're one as well. It is always awesome to have you here on DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to speaking to you soon, all right?
Sounds good, buddy. Thank you, Brandon.
Good stuff there from former Georgia quarterback David Green. And we got a really busy show coming up for you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza the rest of the way. Not only do you hear from Green right there, but you hear from Brad Nessler here coming up in just a moment. We'll also do our MyBookie Best Bets. I'll give you my thoughts on the other SEC games coming up this weekend. Before we do that, though, y'all be patient with us just for a second here because I'm going to take some comments, which is something I love to do anyway. But we also got to take care of a little bit of business for our radio show. Every now and then, something like this happens. We'll let you in on the inside here. We've got some formatting things to take care of for the radio show. So as I'm taking these comments, you may notice me say something sort of weird here and there. That's to sort of take care of our technical folks who have to get the radio show on the air here. So we'll take some of your comments and kind of roll through with some of that and then get on with the rest of the broadcast here coming up in a moment. Plus, for the most part, everybody sort of likes the comment portion of the show anyway. So why not get into a few of those a little bit early? So let me get ready to do that right now. So here on DawgNation Daily, we will get David Green coming up in just a moment. But before we do that, I do want to take a couple of your comments here. We'll kind of dive in and give you a chance to sort of weigh in on everything that's sort of happening with the broadcast and happening around Georgia football here today. Look forward to hearing you on that. Bob Fakay says that Kirby Smart said Georgia's not going anywhere. A win Saturday would certainly prove that. And I think Bob's point here is probably pretty well taken. And this is one of those things that I have heard a lot from Georgia fans kind of heading into Saturday. I'm a fan myself. Y'all know that. I speak about that all the time. I've never, pretended to be some sort of, super serious reporter or anything like that. I am, in this role as sort of the voice of the fans. And like one of the things that I think about a lot is when I hear from you is that you want more than just a win. Now, obviously, you'll take a win and sort of roll on and get ready for the next big showdown for the season. But many of you have sort of said, no, I want that stake. I want that proving ground because I think a lot of us sort of sat through a week of, boy, did you see how good Alabama looked against Louisville? A lot of Georgia fans would say, well, who is Louisville? The last I checked, Lamar Jackson's not there anymore. The last I checked, this is not quite as talented team as it once was. But it's been a week's worth of, Kirk Herbstreit saying Alabama will score 50 points a game with Tua Tagovailoa, and Alabama is the clear, unquestioned number one team. And admittedly, there may be a little jealousy there for a lot of Georgia fans who say that they want to get some of that same kind of attention for themselves. And you know what? Maybe on Saturday, that's exactly what's going to happen. As I mentioned when we were talking about Jonathan Ledbetter a moment ago, I'm still not confident enough about Georgia to say they're going to be able to dominate every opponent regardless of who's injured. I mean, injuries still matter for this Georgia team, but assuming it's as healthy as it looks to be on Saturday and assuming that Ledbetter does sort of shake off whatever he's dealt with and is a factor in the game, then the kind of statement win that a lot of Georgia fans are looking for, I think they may get it, and I'm looking forward to see it go down. It's great to have with us here on DawgNation Daily. Hope you enjoy David Green right now. All right, so thanks for letting us do that. We'll take a couple more of your comments here. And listen, at the end of the show, we'll do our regular full-on comment section like we always do. We just want to make sure we do right by our radio folks here and take good care of them. So we'll do a few more comments here, and then we'll get on with the rest of the broadcast here. All right, really good stuff there from David Green. Want to take a few of your comments right now on what David had to say, and we'll kind of address everything that's going to be happening against South Carolina on Saturday. By the way, James Crump talking about the Alabama quarterback situation. He says that Tua Tagovailoa is going to lose to Ole Miss in another week. I got to admit, after all the attention Alabama's been getting as of late, I wouldn't mind seeing that go down. Jacob McMillan said about the game coming up on Saturday, I'm not worried about the running game. Our starters only got a couple carries. I like spreading it around. Yeah, I was going to talk to David Green about this, and we just sort of ran out of time, basically. But if you look at Georgia, its stat line for this past Saturday, it was exactly. It was really weird how statistically exact this was. It was exactly 45% passing plays, exactly 55% running plays. It was 27 and 33. So, you don't really see that clean of a math equation, but on Saturday it was a real clean, 45-55 split between pass and run. Go back and look at Georgia from a year ago. That's a huge difference. That's really even a big difference from 2016 and even the Brian Schottenheimer forgotten year of 2015. Georgia was about 2 runs for every pass then. It's been kind of a while since we've seen Georgia in that sort of, almost balance between run and pass. Is that the way the team's going to be all season long? I'd like to see Fromm be given more opportunities to throw. I don't know that that's necessarily going to always be quite that balanced, which is probably sort of a long way around getting to the point of, I just think that when you look at what happened against Austin Peay, Kirby Smart used that as a way of sort of pounding his fist on the podium and saying, I need to see more explosive plays from my running backs. I just firmly believe that if Georgia wanted more explosive plays from its running back, it could have gotten them against Austin Peay. I don't think there was some sort of deficiency displayed against Austin Peay. Somehow, Georgia just chose not to sort of do that there in that game. I honestly believe that, as I mentioned earlier in the week here on DawgNation Daily, I think the South Carolina defensive line, with a lot of 3-star players and a lot of guys who sort of come in around that 275, 280-pound mark, I think in a lot of those cases, I just sort of think that Georgia's going to have its way running the football here. Now, I hope that's not at the expense of giving Fromm some opportunity to pass, because I do want to see Demetrius Robertson get involved. I want to see McCole Hardman get involved. I want to see a lot of that stuff. But I think that Georgia is going to really assert its running game, even in the first half, maybe without James Cook, because if you want to put Brian Herring in that spot as the third running back for the first half, I think that's a role that he can be fine in. I do hope to see some explosive plays from Cook in the second half when he returns from his suspension for the targeting call. But my guess is if a lot of people left Athens on Saturday saying, where were the big giant holes to run through and where were the 40 and 50-yard runs from Georgia running backs, I believe you may see some of those on Saturday against South Carolina, because I believe it's going to be an offensive priority. One way or another, I can't wait for the game and can't wait to talk to you more about it here this week. But for now, we got DawgNation Daily rolling on.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Always fun to have David Green here on the DawgNation Daily. David is just a sharp guy. And you got to understand something when it comes to a David here. That's my era, right? I mean, I'm almost exactly, I guess, actually, I don't know how old he is, but, I'm just a little bit older than he is, I guess. So I'm like, just out of college, going to a lot of games, had no responsibilities, I didn't have a whole lot of money, but the money I did have, I could sort of spend it all on Georgia football. So in like 2002, 2003, 2004, I just go into every game. Home games, road games, everything else. So to, have him come on and reminisce about, the Paul Oliver interception. Of course, Paul's the guy that DawgNation misses every single day. And to reminisce about the David Pollock strip in 2002, a really fun game and a fun moment. That's just a cool thing here on DawgNation Daily. And I would invite you to go out and see Terrence Edwards this upcoming Saturday, or should say, correct me here, 2 Saturdays from now before the Middle Tennessee State game, signing autographs there at Tailgate Apparel, because much like David's a good storyteller about Georgia football, Terrence is as well. Y'all know around DawgNation, we really, really love Terrence Edwards, and you'll love seeing him at Tailgate Apparel next Saturday. For now, though, let me kind of push pause on our Georgia-South Carolina talk and get ready to look at some of the other SEC games this weekend. I'll give you my thoughts on the games. It's our MyBookie Best Bets. And by the way, not to brag here, but the best bets were best bets a week ago. I believe we can go back and check the tape on the games that I picked. I went 3-0. I sort of stayed away from Ole Miss and Texas Tech. I sort of stayed away from Alabama, Louisville. But I gave you a strong play on LSU, strong play on Auburn, strong play against Tennessee. Went 3-0 in those picks. So maybe the MyBookie best bets is actually going to turn out to be a best bet this year. The one thing that I do know for you, though, is that if you can be just as successful as I was a week ago, and most of you will do a whole lot better, then you want to put your money where your mouth is and play with the pros play at MyBookie, because at MyBookie they offer a fast, no-hassle payout when you win. And more importantly than that, right now, DawgNation daily listeners and viewers can get a very special offer. Your first deposit match dollar for dollar. But you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. So simply find MyBookie online. It's MyBookie. Find MyBookie online. Use the promo code DawgNation, and you can get your first deposit matched dollar for dollar. Speaking of the MyBookie best bets here for this upcoming weekend, let's take a look at those right now. I think 3 games of real focus in the SEC, obviously, other than Georgia, South Carolina, which we talk about for the entire week. First of all, you got Mississippi State going to Kansas State. Now, listen, I ain't no dummy here. Bill Snyder has been a point spread covering machine in Manhattan, Kansas for years and years and years. I have a lot of doubts about first-year coach Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State. I think 9 points on the road here is way too many points. I think that Kansas State somehow covers this number. Let me take the Wildcats plus the 9. I'm going to go against Mississippi State as a MyBookie best bet here. Also have a pretty strong play, or at least what I have a pretty strong opinion on when it comes to Clemson at Texas A&M. I think that if you look at Texas A&M, its biggest wins in the SEC have virtually all come away from Kyle Field. There are going to be 100,000 people at Kyle Field on Saturday. Much like in Williams-Brice Stadium, those Aggies fans are going to be making a lot of noise. But Clemson's done this kind of stuff before. It's been in the college football playoff for the last 3 years. It's beaten Auburn 2 years in a row. 2 years ago, it actually won at Auburn. So in September, in an intense SEC environment, Clemson's been there. There's no element of surprise here because Dabo Swinney's coached against Jimbo Fisher every year going back to his time there at Texas A&M. I think that Jimbo Fisher's eventually going to do big things at Texas A&M. I do not think this Saturday is an example of that. Even as a big home underdog, I actually like Clemson to cover here. I think this is a disappointing day for Texas A&M. And then finally, Kentucky at Florida. Look, here's my take on this. You know, it's the 30-plus year losing streak for Kentucky. It's a lot of, problems for the Wildcats here. But, folks, I just don't think Florida's that good. If you're going to give me a 2-touchdown favorite, I'm going to tell you right now, I do not think Florida covers that number. I think the Kentucky Wildcats, I don't know if they win the game outright. I don't think they necessarily break the 30-plus year losing streak. But in terms of keeping it closer than Florida fans want, I think that's exactly what happens. For Dan Mullen, who in front of his own home crowd with Felipe Franks at quarterback, would like nothing more than to show off his offensive prowess, I don't think it happens this Saturday. I think it's a disappointing day for Florida. I think Kentucky keeps it close. That is a MyBookie best bet. We do the MyBookie best bets every Thursday here on the DawgNation Daily. Use the promo code DawgNation when you find MyBookie online. You get your first deposit matched dollar for dollar. It's great to have him here on the program. It's also great to have Brad Nessler. Hope you enjoy him right now. We'll get ready to see Brad Nessler right now. And here on DawgNation Daily, let's get ready to say hello to the guy that's going to have the call, 3:30 on Saturday on CBS. He is Brad Nessler. Brad, welcome back to a DawgNation Daily. We really appreciate your time today. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Brandon. Always good to be with you.
Always good to have you with us as well. And I think about that atmosphere coming up on Saturday in Williams-Brice Stadium. Probably fair to say in a game that you saw Georgia a year ago, maybe the Dogs, including the freshman quarterback at the time, Jake Fromm, didn't handle that too well in Auburn in November. Do you think about that at all for this team going back on the road here this September? What kind of impact do you think that loud crowd there in Columbia is going to have on this game on Saturday?
I tell you what, they have one of the best pregame atmospheres, pre-kick atmospheres, I should say. The 5 minutes before kickoff there gives you chills, and if you're not ready to go, then there's something wrong with you. But, they've handled good crowds and big crowds before. Notre Dame was almost like a home game. I know that last year, and Auburn would rattle anybody, I think, at the end of last season. But, Jake's come a long way as far as the quarterback situation. I think the rest of the guys have been in huge games, SEC title, the Oklahoma game in the national championships. I don't think he'll have that great impact, although it does kind of make the hair on your arms rise up a little bit when you're at Williams-Brice in that couple of minutes before kickoff.
Yeah, listen, I'll agree. I think it is a great atmosphere for college football. I'm looking forward to seeing it myself. And you mentioned Jake Fromm. Obviously, as a TV broadcaster, you like good stories on both sides of every game that you do. I think that Fromm is kind of becoming one. You mentioned the Notre Dame game a year ago. That was his first start, and boy, he's really grown up a lot since then. How much are you looking forward to kind of having a chance to broadcast him again on Saturday and sort of tell the next phase of his story as he goes from being somewhat of a freshman phenom to now kind of a little bit more of a seasoned veteran at the starting quarterback position for Georgia?
I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to get to know him a little bit this year. Freshmen are off limits, until the bowl game last year. I don't think anybody, for the most part, had a chance to really get to know him, at least in my business. So from this point through his senior year, you get to know guys better. And I've done that with everybody, every quarterback that Georgia's ever had. You start off, you don't get to know them. And then, pretty soon you find out they're all in the business, like David Green and Aaron Murray and DJ Shockley. And I'm going, what happened? Where did all those years go by? Hudson Mason, I was just with him a couple of weeks ago. So you go from barely knowing the kids to getting to know them, watching them grow into men, watching them become upperclassmen, and then get out in the business world or maybe the football world if they're lucky enough. So from that standpoint, I think I'm looking forward to everything. I don't plan on going fishing with them or anything like that because I'll either end up in a hook in my leg or something in the back of my head. But anyway, from that standpoint, it's going to be kind of fun to get to know some of the younger guys.
Speaking of quarterbacks, you're in a lot of production meetings and things like that right now. How much do you guys think you'll focus on the Justin Fields story on Saturday? Is this relevant for this weekend? Is it something that you think that you guys will spend some time in the broadcast on in terms of, Fields maybe being a change of pace for Fromm, or you guys anticipating this sort of being Fromm's game?
I think it's Jake's game unless Kirby decides. I can't see them against South Carolina having a plan where, okay, Jake plays 3 series, boom, we're putting Justin in, I don't care what's happening. Could happen. Alabama sort of did it in their game, and now we know that Tua is a starter and Jalen's going to be a part of the team. And that was the biggest off-season story, I guess, other than, the Justin Fields and Jake Fromm situation. Bigger at Alabama just because 2 guys that, could start anywhere, and I think that could be the case too, although we don't know that much about Justin yet. But, yeah, I hope to see him play. If he plays, I think that means things are really going well or they're not going well for Jake. But I would imagine in this game, Kirby's just going to play it by feel. If they get a lead or something's going really well, I expect to see Justin. If they throw him in there just for the heck of it, I'll be surprised.
On the other side of the field over on South Carolina, Deebo Samuel kind of makes his return. He's one of the most dynamic players in the SEC, both as a wide receiver and a kick returner. I got to imagine when you think about scenarios for Georgia, containing him this Saturday is sort of at the top of all those lists in terms of ultimately how Georgia would win this game if that does indeed happen, right?
Yeah, no doubt. He's the only South Carolina guy that's a preseason first-team All-SEC performer, and he should be. He had played 2 games and a little bit last year before he got hurt, and he already had 6 touchdowns at that point, and he was scary. He had 97-yard touchdowns, kickoff returns first 2 times, basically in the 2 games that he played that he touched it. He's a big-timer. Brian Edwards would scare me almost as much, not as fast, doesn't do quite as many things, but a guy that's a big-time receiver too. So their receiving core, I think, is pretty decent. Trying to replace Hayden Hurst is not going to be easy. That was a big void, I think, at tight end for them. But I look at their offense, and I think this is the best quarterback situation around the league that I can remember in quite a while. It seems like everybody's got a good one. Some people have 2 good ones. Jake Bentley's another good one. So he played well against Georgia last year, had a couple interceptions, but he's a lot better this year than he was last year, and it seems like he grows every game. So he's a good one, and I think the Georgia defense will have a little trouble with him.
Saturday at 3:30 on CBS. It is the biggest televised stage in all of college football. Brad Nessler, thank you so much for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, to help tell the story of that game. We'll look forward to watching you on TV this weekend.
You got it, Brandon. We'll find out a lot about the SEC East on Saturday.
All right, really fun stuff from Brad Nessler there from the CBS Sports. He'll have the call on Saturday with Gary Danielson as Georgia gets ready to take on South Carolina in Williams-Brice Stadium. And, of course, I mentioned earlier Kentucky and Florida on Saturday. I'm excited about that one as well. I'm excited about seeing the Gators play poorly. I think that's what's going to happen. And 51 days from now, I think that happens again. as Georgia beats Florida. It's our Gator Hater Countdown on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We look forward to doing that every day because around here we think that Georgia fans are supposed to be Gator haters. I'll also say that last night it was really fun to present the announcement of our Dog Nation Invasion to Baton Rouge Marlowe's giveaway. I know many of you were disappointed that maybe you didn't miss our first. You missed out on our first giveaway. You weren't the winner, or you didn't get registered in time. Well, good news. Marlowe's Tavern going to step up and provide you an opportunity right now. So check out DawgNation.com, and you can find the entry there and register for your chance to win. We'll look forward to announcing that soon, courtesy of Marlowe's Tavern, and we'll see you tomorrow right here on Dog Nation Daily and on video. Many of you in the comment section noticing the change of shirt. I thought it was just appropriate. I felt like Brad Nesser was more of a black shirt guest. I felt like that David Green maybe more of a red shirt guest. I sort of like to kind of keep you all guessing, much like how maybe Georgia runs out in the red jerseys, but then during warm-ups they change them out and go black jerseys actually during the game. It's just sort of my thing as well. I decided to black out that portion of the show. But I'm glad you guys noticed that. We will take some of your comments here. We've got a little time to do that. Clarence Lee says reality is coming to Columbia on Saturday. I mean, listen, it is almost unanimous in terms of confidence from Georgia fans this upcoming weekend. I, for the most part, feel the same way. I just think this is going to be I think that what you hope is, and obviously around here this is what we hope. I think what you hope is that Georgia sort of established a level of a sort of expected performance where this is a much bigger game for South Carolina. And they do sort of try to, drum up whatever emotion that they can. And yet it's just not going to be enough because Georgia's got a lot better players. Because if you give me the choice of the loud crowd of the better players, I want the better players. You give me the choice of, the motivation because the other side thinks of it as a big rivalry of the better players. I want the better players. Georgia's got the better roster here, and I think it's going to really lean on that all day long. Telvin Phelps says, I'm a smooth guy. Listen, Telvin, I appreciate that. That's a very nice compliment. Thank you very much. Ryan Henderson, also a nice compliment, says he looks forward to Dog Nation Daily to help get through every workday. Yeah, listen, when we started doing this show at 10 a.m., that was always my plan of, hey, let's give people a break from work. 10 a.m. is like that perfect coffee break, or, for those of you that go into work a little later, you can kind of, sit back and relax before the day gets really, really crazy, crowded with stuff. We know that not everybody can listen or watch every single minute. We do a lot of content around here, but we want to be here for you when you're able to be there for us. And so for those of you that can even check in for a couple of minutes, we certainly appreciate that. Santiago de Yarn says, how about a dinner at Marlowe's with Jeff and BA? Talking dogs during dinner would be awesome. That would actually be a really good idea. Maybe we'll do that at some point in time, Santiago. That's a really good idea. Kevin Mills about Akil Crumpton saying that he looks extra strong, extra fast, extra competent this year. He might be a big factor. Yeah, I mean, that was some of the buzz during the summer that he was maybe a little bit more a part of the offense than he had been a year ago, and I think you saw some example of that on Saturday. Maybe you do think a bit about Crumpton here in kind of a spot like that. Drew Miller says that I'd get even more compliments if I'd start giving away more tickets. That's probably true. And listen, don't put it past me to sort of, flatter myself by dangling a few tickets out there. Listen, don't put that past me at all. Miriam Martin Corbin says, where will I be on Saturday? So we are going to be, I guess sort of out and about. Some of the stuff, we're going to be at the game, but some of the stuff in terms of the pregame is still sort of yet to be determined. So y'all tweet at me on Saturday. Let me know where you are, and I'm going to try to corral Jeff. Maybe we'll come over and see you guys before the game. So let us know where you are. And we'll try to do that. Vicente Vasquez Turner says, do you think the linebacker core will hold? Right now, I have to admit that I don't think the linebacker core now is what it's going to be later on. I think right now you've got an interesting group of four between Natrez and Monty Rice and Jawan Taylor and Tay Crowder. But it is just obvious from 10,000 miles away that Channing Tindall and Quay Walker are coming for somebody's job. And I don't mean that in any way disrespectful to the guys that are doing big things for Georgia right now. But those two young men, Tindall and Walker, are just going to be very hard to deny. So, and listen, I know Tindall's in his hometown on Saturday. That's probably a big deal to him. I'd love to see him make a big play there because of that. But at some point in time, it may be week 2, maybe a little too early for that there. But by the time it's all said and done, it could really be something. Really be something with those guys. So when you say, will the linebacking core hold, What I think is that it may hold up for right now, but in terms of guys holding on to their spots, given the way that some of these freshmen are popping, I just don't know. I just don't know. JY says Monty Rice is going to be a beast, though, and Monty very well might be. Monty's one of those guys, and y'all know I'm very obsessed with like the 4-star and the 5-star rankings, and I sort of prioritize those guys sometimes at the expense of other players. Monty Rice, though, is that example, and Georgia's had a few of these in recent years, but Monty Rice is that example of how this stuff isn't always 100% accurate, because Monty, and I think David Marshall may be like this a little bit too for that defense. Some of the guys in the secondary last year were kind of like that. Monty Rice is just better than his recruiting ranking would have suggested he was. I mean, wasn't he like a composite 3-star? He wasn't, a 4-star by every recruiting service's estimation, I don't believe. And yet he's always just kind of been. He went through spring practice 2 springs ago, so that helped him. But he's that thumper, that run stop. He's the linebacker. He does more than just run. He can get in there and tap you a little bit when you're trying to run the football. So so I do think that Monty Rice is a part of this thing. I think that with Patrick, with his experience, he's a part of it. But those freshmen are coming, y'all. They are coming. James Crump kind of agrees with the previous commenter that if somebody's losing playing time, James says Monty Rice is not going to be that guy. James Bryant talking about wreaking havoc from the outside. I hope to see a lot of that on Saturday. Matt Rukavina brings up a really good point on Facebook as well that the hotter it is, the longer a hot game goes, the more depth comes into play, and that really is true. And Georgia is sort of going to be better at the end of the season than some of the teams it's playing, because when they suffer injuries, they have not quite as capable replacements. Theoretically, Georgia does have capable replacements. In a game like this, where you just may have some attrition, you may have some cramping. I hope not, but you may have some. You may have some, just some fatigue. To be able to run fresh bodies in there is going to matter, and Georgia should be able to do that in an effective way, in a way that South Carolina cannot match. Kid brings up an interesting point. Did not realize this, that Georgia's going to play Oklahoma again in the Rose Bowl of volleyball. I love that terminology for it. I have to admit, I don't know a lot about volleyball. I did not realize that Georgia and Oklahoma were playing. That's kind of a cool thing to think about. That's a pretty good thing to think about there. Richard Lumpkin says we need folks wearing the spikes on Saturday. I imagine you see some Spike Squad stuff in the game. I would imagine that would be the way it goes. Eric Smith says, do I know how to use the split screen so I can see Facebook and YouTube at the same time? So I could probably like minimize my browsers and get them both up there. The problem is I can't read them both at the same time. Y'all got to realize something. I am not that smart. Trying to do more than one thing at one time is not particularly easy for me. So even if I did go split screen with both the feeds, I can't follow them. Plus, and I've complained about this before, and y'all don't care about this, and so I'm not going to complain about this a whole lot. The Facebook comment section is a mess. It is just not the people that comment in there. I love them. But the way that the Facebook comments post, a few months ago, they changed from posting most recent at the top to most recent at the bottom. That has rocked my world to the point where I can't hardly even stand it. So it's all I can do just to even keep track of what's even in Facebook even anymore. So even if I could do split screen, my buddy Mike Johnson could do like the sort of dual browsers up there. Even if I could do that, I'm not sure I could pay attention to it. Richard Lumpkin says that I noticed him. I can die now. Listen, I wish I could notice every single comment that's in here. I know a lot of you will repost your comments over and over again, and please know that I've never intentionally ignored anyone's comment. I just try to keep up with them, which I am very thankful that we have so many to read every single day. College Football Maniac over on YouTube says he's got 31-21. I think most Georgia fans will be disappointed if South Carolina scores 21 points. I see the game a little more than that. Stacy Goebel on YouTube says South Carolina is way overconfident for a team that's so overmatched talent-wise. Georgia will simply outlast South Carolina in the heat. So here's South Carolina's. If I want to give you the most optimistic assessment for South Carolina, Jake Bentley is capable of having a good day throwing the football, and if he's getting rid of it quick, which South Carolina says it wants to, if he's getting rid of it quick, then maybe you do neutralize DeAndre Walker at that point. Maybe you do. Somebody mentioned Brenton Cox earlier. Maybe when Cox is in the game, you neutralize that a bit if South Carolina is getting rid of it quick. But as Kirby Smart sort of alluded to the other day, and Will Muschamp sort of, I guess, tangentially alluded to early in the week himself, the problem with saying, I'm going to go up-tempo to keep Georgia from getting a pass rush against me is, what if you don't convert? And David Green was perfect on this earlier. All of a sudden, you got to look at your defense and say, I know it's 100 degrees. I know that you were just out there 9 seconds ago, but go out there and get them again. Go out there and get another stop. I mean, that's really a problem, right? I mean, there is no free lunch. That you can't just say, well, the perfect solution here is to go up tempo. You are robbing from something to pay off something else. And if you go up tempo, and if you're South Carolina and then don't convert first downs, you're putting your defense in a horrible situation. And Muschamp's a defensive-minded coach. I don't think he's ever going to even flirt with the idea of making his defense vulnerable against a Georgia offense is a lot more potent right now. I think that every way you slice this game up, you still come back to the same equation of, South Carolina is going to try to do a lot to minimize some of its talent deficiencies, and you can only hide that for so long. Now, is this one of those deals where you can get in the car and start driving back to Georgia at halftime? No, probably not. I mean, South Carolina is talented enough that it could hang around. I mean, Jeff told you yesterday they got 19 4-stars from the last 3 years. That ain't much, at least by the comparison of the top of the SEC, but at the right places, maybe they do hang around for a little bit here. Maybe Rico Dowdle is improved enough as a running back that they're, moving the football a bit. But ultimately, college football is not all that complicated. And the big uns and the fast uns on one side are going to sort of overwhelm the other side, and that's exactly what's going to happen. One of the things I think is cool on YouTube, and I'm going to go back to Facebook after this, a lot of y'all looking back to that James Jackson fumble in 1986. Now, I'm old enough to remember this. And, it's amazing like what life was like sort of pre-social media, like there's no message board, there's none of that. So back then in college football, this is like the dark ages of college football. Back then, and I bet our buddy Connor Raleigh doesn't even know this because he's like one of these young hipster type people. In the 80s, you could not advance a fumble. Did you know this? So Connor did know that. So when the ball was on the ground, you could fall on it, but you couldn't pick it up and run with it. It's sort of like a muffed punt now. When a ball's on the ground, you could not pick it up and run with it. So 86, I think I've got the right game here. James Jackson was Georgia's quarterback. Is sort of running into the game. The clock hits 0. He takes the football and places it right on the turf. And then just basically walks off. It's essentially his way of sort of spiking the football. South Carolina player scoops it up, runs it towards the end zone, and chaos ensues. Now, to Jackson's credit, by rule, his ball, could not be returned and the game was over with. But like in this sort of pre-Twitter, pre-message board environment, mass hysteria. I remember being at church the next day. That's all anybody was talking about. South Carolina people thinking somehow that the rules were not what they were and that should have been counted as a touchdown. Georgia fans sort of mad at the quarterback for even doing that, despite the fact that by rule there was nothing that could be done. I just remember that being a very big, big deal. And then I mentioned this, I think, during the actual regular broadcast here. The 88 game in Williams-Brice was one of the real heartbreakers for me. Just a heartbreaking game because that was a good – Georgia in 88 was a good team that just gave a bunch of games away for reasons I'll never understand. That was a heartbreaking game. But then you've also got the fun ones as well. Robert Edwards in 95. He had 5 touchdowns that day against South Carolina. That's kind of a fun South Carolina game. So, listen, over the course of time, you have some good and the bad. Now, somebody's disputing my memory here. Somebody says that was Clemson. Ray Duke says that was Clemson. I thought for sure that was South Carolina. Am I misremembering that? If I am, I apologize. But I thought I had that one right. Alan Verbanchik also says he's got Texas A&M upsetting Clemson. Boy, I don't see that yet. I like Clemson on the road, even as a big favorite, like a 12-point favorite. I like them even minus those 12 points. I know that's a lot of points to give a home team, but I'm going to have to give it in this case. I think A&M's going to beat somebody this year. I don't think it's going to be Clemson week 2. A&M's just not been good at home, y'all. They have had some real problems at Kyle Field. Jeff Porter on Facebook says, so Jeff Porter says that he was talking to a Georgia fan that was not confident going on the road and coming away with the win, even though he had a Georgia hat on. Don't think we'll have a problem with Fromm and Fields under center. So you do have some of that kind of stuff going on right now of some Georgia fans have sort of turned the corner and say, listen, this is a brand new era. 5 losses at South Carolina to ranked South Carolina teams. That's previous coaches. That's previous generations. That's nothing for this team to worry about. And then that, Georgia fan sort of opposite that, who sort of still has some of those memories of some of the things that have happened in the past. I sort of get that conflict. And, I think that there's 2 things that go on here. There's sort of like analysis and emotion. There's head and there's heart. And, I'll admit that my sort of analysis as the host of the show is when you look at, Georgia's offensive line against South Carolina's defensive line. When you look at South Carolina, who was not particularly effective running the football a year ago, is it going to be that much better this year? When you look at South Carolina starting a freshman in its secondary that could be exploited by guys like Demetrius Robertson, McCole Hardman, Terry Godwin, who I assume is going to play. When you look at all these issues, it keeps coming back to a Georgia win for me. But now the emotional part of me and the part that Jeff Porter might be unhappy with, I will admit, is it always makes me just a little bit nervous when all of Georgia fans are suddenly in complete agreement about something. That's just never a great sign to me. I don't think that matters. I don't think it means anything in terms of this game. But I will admit there is that little bit of like a sort of tinge of anxiety that sort of pops up when I hear just one after another, like, it's no big deal. This one's 31-10 or 37-3 or whatever. When everybody's this sure, I'm always just a little bit nervous. But overall, I think the analysis here is spot on, that this should be a pretty convincing Georgia victory. Let me go get a couple more. Todd West doing a little, look at that. Todd West bringing up my alma mater, the Johnson Knights. He says they're going to kill Riverside. Well, I'd love to see Johnson win a football game. It feels like they've had even more than their typical struggles in football as of late. But it's kind of nice to see a little Johnson Knights talk. That's my alma mater for those of you who are unaware. Hakeem Brooks says South Carolina gave up 130. I'm assuming rushing yards against Coastal Carolina. If they can't stop the run Saturday, it's going to be over early. And yeah, I said this on, I think it was Tuesday. That's for me really the place where this game falls apart for South Carolina. Big offensive line for Georgia, dynamic running backs, explosive runs. I just think it's as simple as that. And then you probably throw a couple touchdowns on top of that. All right, let me go back to YouTube, then we'll get ready to say goodbye here. Brian Kephart says, if this team was coached by Rick, then we may lose this game, not with Kirby. I know that's still a sore subject for a lot of people, but I won't say anything negative about Rick. I'll just say that I'm very, very happy with the demeanor that Kirby Smart's team seem to be adopting here. And Richard Lumpkin really does bring up a good point. I know that a lot of people sort of make this sound like it's like some sort of cliche, sort of football guy talk, but he says that it's a new era. You play to a standard, not to an opponent. I do really take that very seriously. That whether it be getting frustrated when Florida scored in the second half last year, despite the fact it was a blowout score, seemingly not being all that happy necessarily just because Georgia was piling up wins a year ago. I do think that's one thing that Georgia is pretty good at now, and the players seem to be buying into, is they do sort of establish that standard, and people are just afraid to fall below that. And I think that we had Brandon Cablano last night, and Cablano was an example of the sort of the first version of this year one. Didn't have the success that the 2017 team did, but you saw how the foundation was getting laid. Where Kirby sort of convinces a lot of these senior leaders, or in some cases maybe junior leaders, to sort of decide for themselves what the standard is going to be, and then the players themselves police it. That's what Kirby's really good at. I don't think it's that Georgia players are afraid of Kirby. I think that Kirby is good at conveying a message to other players, and then the players are afraid of each other. Listen, peer pressure is real, right? It's the same reason why every high school kid dresses the same, and it's the same reason why once DeAndre Baker, Jonathan Ledbetter, or even sophomore Andrew Thomas, once they look at a player and say, hey, cut it out, stop doing that, you don't want to be the Georgia player that's not, sort of pulling the rope in the same direction. So that's I think the brilliance of Kirby Smart's strategy in terms of establishing a standard is that he uses players to police it, which makes the will to sort of do it, all the more intense there. So really good stuff, really good comments. We got a fun show tomorrow. A lot of you are asking. Mike Johnson's going to be back tomorrow. Haven't had him on the show in a while. Jeff Sintel going to be here as well. So we'll have another really busy day tomorrow. But what else would you want to do other than talk football here? as you get ready for South Carolina. We got DN90 coming up later on the Dog Nation video channels. We've got the podcast will be posted. Y'all, I'm sorry about yesterday's podcast for those of you who listened to it. The show's on all the podcast channels. Somehow I just didn't get to the world-famous DawgNation.com, so we'll get them both up here today, and we will see you back on video live tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Y'all, I really appreciate you making this part of your day. Look forward to seeing you then. Dog Nation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza. Have a great day, everybody.